Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Plutarch finishes up his treatise on becoming aware of one's own progress in virtue by highlighting one particular trait that he thinks is quite important. So did he save the best for last? Maybe not, but it certainly is something that will be helpful as an index and also as a practice. And that is not letting oneself off too easily when it comes to however we want to translate it. Moral failings, it's actually translated here as sins, which is not terrible. Mistakes, errors. So the term here is ton ex amartanomen, right? So hamartia is a mistake, a flaw, a failure of some sort, doing the wrong thing, perhaps for, a bad reason, perhaps even for a good reason, but something goes astray. And we do have a tendency to look at our big flaws and say, well, I've got to really work on this, but the minor ones, maybe we don't take them quite as seriously. And Plutarch is saying, if we don't, we're not actually going to make any progress. So no longer thinking, no longer having the point of view that any of our failings are unimportant, mikron. Small is another way you could translate that, but here unimportant, without value, without any implications for us. So he tells us that instead of that, we should be studiously circumspect, and the word there is ex eulabeistai, which is a verb. So eulabeia is actually a term that means caution. It's a kind of good fear about something. Circumspect works, you're looking around, you're paying attention to things. We want to, focus on what we need to. And indeed, the word for attentiveness will come up a little bit later in this. So being circumspect and heedful, so pros echen, that's that term. The word pros oche, which gets talked about quite a bit in philosophy as a way of life, as being, a very important, we could call it practice or attitude. Sometimes it's translated as attentiveness or mindfulness. It comes from prosechein, which means to pay attention to things, right? So you should be cautious and you should be paying attention, and you should be paying attention to all of them, even if they seem like they're kind of trivial. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to beat yourself up or be a perfectionist or anything like that, but you want to register failings as actually being that. And he's got an interesting metaphor. Those who have given up the hope of ever being rich make nothing of their small expenditures, with the idea that whatever is added to a little will make nothing great. So people who don't plan to have wealth are, kind of careless with it. I'll buy some lottery tickets. It doesn't matter if I go out for drinks. Let's order in over and over again. And then they never have any money, right? What about other people who do pay attention to it? He says, hope as it draws nearer to its goal joins hands with wealth in increasing the desire for wealth. So it is, so here's the analogy, with the activities that bear upon virtue. So entois pros arete pragmesin, right? When we do that, we will increase our stock, not of money, but you could say of moral character, of strength, of the virtues that we actually need. And then he talks about typical excuses that people make. He only gives you 2 of these, which, we can translate into English of our own time, and I think probably relate to very easily. But we can think of all sorts of other excuses that go along with this. So the first one, what difference does it make, right? Literally, so in Greek, ti garto paratuto, well, who cares about this? Who cares about this minor thing? Well, if you want to become a better person, you care about it. You don't just say, it's no big deal. And then here's another one. This way now, better, Beltion, next time. So often we excuse our failings by saying, oh yeah, today I didn't do that hot, but I'll do better down the line. We do that not just with single failings, we do that with like changing our life plans. Well, I haven't gone to the gym to exercise for a month, but tomorrow I'll start doing that. Tomorrow I'll start my diet. Tomorrow I'll make sure I know where all my money is going, and we can go on and on. Well, what if we're talking about moral failings? Tomorrow I will be temperate. Tomorrow I'll behave justly. Tomorrow I'll stop telling little white lies. Tomorrow I'll actually stand up for myself and other people in the way that I should. Tomorrow I'll get a grasp on my temper. And we could go on and on and on with the kind of examples that people give, right? So making excuses, we want to stop doing that. He also talks about the imagining that a lot of people do, that the things that they are falling into really don't matter that much. He says, imagining that nothing can cause any great disgrace or shame, right? Nothing should really bother us in that way, or can be of any great importance. What does that do? Well, that makes people, as he says, easygoing, eucheres, and also careless about little things. Oligorus pros ta mikra. Oligorus, not paying attention to those things. Ta mikra, the little things that do add up over time, right? So what should we do instead? He tells us that what we want is to actually pay attention. Again, we see this term prosechon, right? To focus, to be attentive, conscious of, we could say, to each thing, to hekastos, to each of the things that we're doing. And furthermore, we're going to get some bad advice from within ourselves if we have any vices, any kakiai, right? So bad dispositions. If we're, tempted to be unjust, well, then injustice, when we tell a lie, we don't fulfill a commitment, we shave a little bit of the money off of what we're supposed to give somebody, we create a reason not to pay somebody their fair due, then that vice tells us something. It's going to be, making excuses for what we're doing. Literally, sun gnomen means something like forgiveness. The vice says, this isn't a big issue. Be forgiving with yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. You're only human after all. And Plutarch says, well, if you're actually making moral progress, you are not going to be cool with that. Instead, you are going to be dus anasketon and dus kolainon, right? You're going to be impatient and vexed with this bad part of yourself for leading you astray. You don't want to have that part making you worse. And you don't want these errors and excuses that are happening. he's going to finish up with a really interesting analogy here about building. So we don't always build everything perfectly. And he talks about, if you're doing some sort of building project, he says building a rough wall, which is supposed to have a coping. We don't really care that much what we're throwing into the foundation. And he gives some funny examples here. It could be a chance piece of timber, a stone picked up from the ground, some fallen slab from some tomb. You get the idea. That's kind of unsavory. It's fine because you're just building a wall. You're not doing anything really important. However, what if you're building a temple or a palace? Would you be as slipshod with that? No, you actually need a solid foundation. You want it to be really well established. You don't just throw any random thing in there, because if you do, what's going to happen? Your palace or your temple, the walls are going to fall down eventually, or they're going to tilt in weird ways. No, you need to build a really good foundation. Well, this is like people who build themselves. We are our own building projects. So bad people, the phalos, here it's actually translated as slovenly, but that's not a word that we really use much. So just, people who are kind of bad, they bring together actions and conduct of any old kind and just throw them all together. He says they promiscuously throw them together and accumulate actions and conduct of any kind. But if we're going to be building ourselves into palaces or temples, what we want to be, well, then we use our faculty of reason, our logos, to, as he says, fit the actions and conduct to each other properly. We bring each one into place and fit it where it belongs. We don't do this indiscriminately. Instead, we're actually paying very close attention. Now, the way that we do that is by seeing whether in each thing that we do, again, without becoming like a perfectionist or something, being realistic about this, are we measuring up to our ideals, to what it is that we think a good person would be? If we're not, then we need to at least register it, and probably, it wouldn't hurt to feel bad about it and change it in the future, to keep it in mind. If we try to hide it from ourselves, or we say, it doesn't really matter, I'll do better next time, we probably won't do better next time because we're not taking it seriously. So this, according to Plutarch, is a really important sign. I also think you can argue that this is not just a sign, this is one of the very means for developing virtue, if that's what you're interested in doing.